Hello, welcome to the Knit Shift, episode 66. My name is Laura, and today is Sunday, September 4th, 2016. Thank you so much for checking out my podcast today. Whether you are a new or returning viewer, I really appreciate you choosing to spend a little bit of your day with me, and I hope you like what you see here. I am on the interwebs, on the intertubes, as it were, on Instagram as Laura Mahalski. I'm on Ravelry as Yarnstormer, and we do have a group for the podcast over on Ravelry. If you go to the groups tab and search for the Knit Shift, you will find us. This episode is available on iTunes and YouTube and will be embedded at theknitshift.com, where you can find show notes for all episodes. If you have not subscribed on YouTube, I hope you would consider doing so. That way you won't miss any updates from me. It's been a busy week here thanks to a tropical storm named Hermine. We survived. You can see I'm coming to you from my usual spot in my living room here in Norfolk, Virginia. And if you are new here, I live in an apartment with my boyfriend Josh and my dog, my Cocker Spaniel Gracie, who often graces us with her presence on the podcast, though she's sleeping on the floor beside me right now. So yes, I did not float away, even though I live in Norfolk, which is one of the worst cities for flooding and sea level rise on the East Coast. I had a very busy Saturday at work, but I can talk about that more later. I am a journalist here in Norfolk and had to organize all of our Hermine coverage, so that was an adventure. Let's get to it, shall we? Today's episode has a few works in progress and several finished objects and a really big announcement, so stay tuned for that in just a few minutes. And now is as good a time as any to remind you that the Fall Shawl Knit Along is going on and has been for about a month. It basically, it's a chance to knit a shawl of at least 100 gram skein of sock yarn. About 350 to 400 yards is what I'm looking for, though the more yardage you use, the better your chances are for winning a prize. Basically, if you use one skein of sock yarn, you are entered once for a prize. If you knit about 700 yards, you get 2 chances. If you knit 1,000 yards, you get 3 chances. So I've got a way in my head that I'll handle the drawing the random number for that. So I hope you'll consider joining. We have a group over on our group in Ravelry. We have a chatter thread and an FO thread, so there's a lot of really pretty shawls being made right now. Really gorgeous stuff, so do come check it out. This runs through October 31st, and you can check it out on Instagram under the hashtag TKSFallShawl. With that, we can get into finished objects. I have 3 for you this week. I don't know if I've ever had so many before, but the reason is I have a really exciting announcement, and that is that I am going to be an aunt. My brother and sister-in-law are expecting a baby next year. It's been really tough to keep it a secret from you guys, but all of that nervous energy and excitement I have been putting into my knitting needles. So over the past few episodes, when I spoke about secret knitting or having a project that I had a plan for but wasn't ready to talk about, that was all baby knitting. So I am super thrilled. They told me July 11th, which was about 5 episodes ago. It was the week I went to the Navy homecoming to cover it for my job. It was just really sweet seeing all these sailors reunited with their babies, because I just learned 2 days earlier that my brother was going to be a dad. So I've been a very busy knitter. I have 2 baby sweaters and a hat to share with you today that I've finished. I don't have them with me because they've already been given to my brother and sister-in-law, but I thought ahead and filmed some footage for you of the sweaters, and I've got photos to include here. They haven't told their friends yet, but my family knows, so my brother gave me permission to share it with you guys, so I am super excited. I was going to knit the Sugar Plum Shawl by Mina Phillip, and I just couldn't concentrate on it. I was casting that on the week I found out, and I felt like I couldn't knit something for myself. I really wanted to knit something for this baby. So I cast on a baby surprise jacket by Elizabeth Zimmerman. If you are a knitter who's been around a little while, you might have heard of her. She had a knitting TV show on public broadcast channels She has published many books on knitting. She's kind of a knitting guru, I guess you could say. She has since passed away. I believe the New York Times even published an obituary for her, which shows what a big name she was in the world. I knit a baby surprise jacket, which the pattern of which is found in the Knitter's Almanac book, although I'm sure it's in some other publications that she put out. The baby surprise jacket is named such because you knit it flat in garter stitch, and you kind of manipulate the stitch count, and you do decreases and increases, and then at the end you fold it up, and voila, surprise, you have a little jacket, a little sweater for the baby. I will say Elizabeth Zimmerman patterns are tricky. They are written in a very conversational tone. It's not a traditional knitting pattern in any sense of the word. You know, she tells you how many to cast on, but instead of saying knit for 6 rows, she'll say knit for 3 garter bumps. And it's a lot of reading between the lines, which for something like the baby surprise jacket, it's manageable. But for some of her other patterns, I don't know if I would be brave enough to try them. And the good thing about the baby surprise jacket is there are tons of resources on Ravelry to help you knit this project. There is a whole wiki on how to knit the baby surprise jacket. There are photos aplenty. There are tips on how to do certain steps of the process. It's really, really valuable, and I will link in the show notes to some of the things I found most valuable. There are charts available on the Ravelry wiki so you can keep track of which row you're on, which was hugely helpful to me, and I really needed that. Basically, the pattern is such that you cast on a certain number of stitches and you put 2 stitch markers, I don't know, we'll say 15 stitches in from each end. That's not the real number. But you keep decreasing at those 2 stitch markers on each side of each stitch marker for a certain number of rows, I don't remember what. You end up increasing again at those points. So that's kind of the genesis of the pattern. So I'm gonna cut away here to Laura of the Past. Hi everyone, I am sewing buttons onto this baby surprise jacket for my niece or nephew, and I just thought I would show you a little bit of it in the progress. As you can see, there are 1, 2, 3 buttonholes. I find that a yarn over knit 2 together buttonhole works just fine. This is what the pattern calls for. It's a pretty small hole though, so you have to get pretty small buttons if you want them to fit a single yarn over knit 2 together. So I went into my button stash. I don't have a ton, and I came back with these really pretty curlicues. You know, I can't really tell what they are. They're a little bit flowery, but I think they're fine for a boy or a girl. And I'm basically just matching up where it should go, and I'm I'm sewing it in 3 garter bumps from the gray stripe. So I'll be putting one right about here. I'll be putting one right about here. And just like that, the baby sweater is done for my niece or nephew. I am so happy to share this with you guys. I wanted to show you a little tweak that I made to the sweater. I followed the pattern exactly as called for, but the decreases in the 2 corners, I knit these stockinette style instead of doing garter throughout. So on the back side of the sweater I purled, and you can kind of see this line of stockinette right there. You can see I did the same thing on the front. There is a stockinette here and here. And the tricky thing about this pattern, now that I'm done with the sweater and it's all seamed up, the only seaming is you seam here and seam here. The tricky thing about this pattern is it's much easier to see it before you sew it up. It's just much easier to see what I'm about to tell you. But there is a section where you knit only on the center back for about 10 rows. In general, this whole thing is knit flat, but there is one part when you're nearly done with it where you lengthen the back a little bit. So I knit about 10, you knit about, I think it calls for 20 rows, aka 10 garter ridges. So there's a little bit of trickiness, and I'm going to link to something in the Baby Surprise Jacket Wikipedia, or I'm sorry, the wiki on Rav, that will explain what I did, and I really think it's the way to go. It helps preserve the garter ridges, and I found it to be super simple and not much of a headache, and I will link to that in the show notes. So yeah, I am super pleased with this. I knit this in Socks That Rock Lightweight in the colorway Jengu, and the contrasting colors are a little bit of gray and red Knit Picks Capretta, which is a merino cashmere nylon that I'm using for a scarf for my brother, but because he and my sister-in-law went to Ohio State, I decided to just include a little subtle touch of Ohio State colors in this sweater. This should fit the baby. The baby is due in mid-March, so it could be a nice little springtime jacket to wear because it is basically newborn sized. I can't remember if I said it in the video, but I did use size 3 needles, which are 3.25 millimeter. I mailed this to them. I knit this in 6 days, and I mailed it to them, and they opened it on FaceTime, and they loved it. The next thing I have to share with you is a garter yoke baby cardigan, and I'm gonna send it over to Laura of the Past, who will tell you all about it. I am so excited to share these projects with you today. This is the Garter Yoke Baby Cardi by Jennifer Hoel. Hoel is how you spell her last name. This is a free pattern for, I think, fingering or sport weight yarn. I use sport weight yarn. This is Socks That Rock medium weight in the colorway Vine Maple. I have had this in my stash for quite some time, so it felt really, really nice to knit this up and finally find a perfect use for it. It's a one size cardigan. Again, it's a free pattern, so there's not a lot of sizing options, but you can use bigger yarn and needles to knit the size you want. I think this will be about a 6 to 9 month cardigan, which is perfect because the baby would be 6 to 9 months old, basically September through December, or September through November. So I'm thrilled with how this turned out. The buttons are from, oh gosh, probably from just a Joann's or, oh, and here comes Gracie to say hello. Come on, Grace, get out of the way. The buttons are just from a Joann's or something along those lines. It's a seamless cardigan. You start at the neck, do raglan increases, very straightforward, separate for the sleeves, and then begin knitting stockinette down the body and in the sleeves. So I'm thrilled with how this turned out. You can see I used contrasting yarn to sew these buttons on. The yarn that I knit this from is a sport weight, and the holes on the buttons were just way too tiny for me to use sport weight yarn. So I used a little bit of Socks That Rock Lightweight. Actually, it's the white yarn from the baby sweater that I knit for my niece or nephew. So I just used that for a little contrast, and I'm very pleased with how that turned out. After you knit the body and the sleeves, you pick up on each front of the cardigan and knit a garter button band, though the pattern does include instructions for I-cord. And I knit this on a size 4, which is a 3.5 millimeter needle. The other part of this gift for my brother and sister-in-law is this little hat. This is part of the Wee Leafy Baby Set by Pamela Wynn. It's also a free pattern. It's sized for newborns. I basically knit just a few extra stitches because it is essentially a stockinette ribbed hat. Just cast on a few extra stitches to account for the fact that I wanted this to fit an older baby. And then she gives you instructions to knit a leaf separately and then sew it on. And you can see that it's pretty much seamless. Just a very simple whip stitch, I think, is what I use to get this little leaf on there. So I again used size 4 needles for this. It's a super simple pattern. The pattern also includes instructions for socks, or I suppose it could be little baby mitts, and I just chose to make the hat. So there you have it. I have about 15 grams of yarn left over, so this was a great use for a skein of sport weight sock yarn. I was able to deliver this to my brother in person when I went up to Petersburg, Virginia to see him a couple weeks ago before I went to Texas. He was in town for some work training, and I hustled to get it done, as well as the hat, and deliver it to him in person, which was pretty sweet. So yeah, he loved it. My brother appreciates a hand knit, as does my sister-in-law, so this baby is gonna be really cozy. And that brings me to works in progress. I have, I think, 4 to share with you today. One of them is a baby knit. This is a bag you guys haven't seen yet. This is a Mrs. Brown's bag, who Mrs. Brown is, of course, Jody of the Grocery Girls podcast. And if you aren't watching her podcast, her and her sister Tracy, you really, really must check them out. They are so much fun. I adore them, and I was lucky enough to snag this pretty bag in one of Jody's updates. So this little zipper pull, this did not come with it. This is actually from Estee Lauder at Dillard's counter. I was with my boyfriend's mom at a mall in Texas, and she was buying some lotion and creams, and she purchased enough that she got this, you know, they always throw in free gifts, and this was one of the many free gifts that she got. So she let me pick between all 4 animals, and I picked the fox. So nice little extra zipper pull. And this is a good size bag for a shawl, I have to say. So I'm knitting the Anders sweater by Soren Claire Kerr. And if you watch the the Hey Sister podcast, it's another podcast with sister hosts. Tabby, I think, knit an Anders sweater. And when she talked about it on her podcast, I was like, that sweater looks so familiar. And I realized I have had it queued in Ravelry for a little while. And I thought, there's no time like the present to cast on a little Christmas sweater for my niece or nephew. So that's what I did. But I made some pretty heavy modifications, as you are about to see. Basically, it's a pullover, and you can have your choice of putting this little V-neck in the front or the back, and it's the first time I've ever done that with a baby sweater. And I also, for the first time, I got to learn a new technique, and that is the Vickel braid, or an Estonian braid. This horizontal braid here, that is a Vickel braid, and it looks tricky. It is so simple, you guys. I cannot recommend it enough. I want to put this braid on everything. So it's just around the neck the entire way. And so I've decided this will be the front, so let me show this to you. And I'm done with the body, and I have yet to knit the sleeve. Now this pattern, let me get out the pattern and show you what it looks like, because I heavily modified this. It's supposed to have Christmas trees on it. You can see it kind of speckles. But I realized as I was knitting these 2 yarns together, which I'll tell you what they are in a minute, one of them is speckled, and I felt like the gray yarn and the speckles were not playing well to knit a colorwork tree out of it. So I decided to just kind of I just switched to stockinette and knit the bottom and the speckles, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out, actually. I'm okay with this change. I'll knit another Anders sweater someday. So this is a very heavily modified Anders sweater, but the charts were super simple, and I actually knit the first 10 rows or so to right about here. Boy, it's really blowing out. I don't know why. I knit the first 10 rows or so on the plane home from Dallas, and Josh and I had we had gone to Chili's at the airport and had 2 margaritas apiece, and I was a little cocky and doing some color work after 2 margaritas, but all's well that ends well, actually. So and it was very simple color work, to be fair. So I'm really pleased with this. This gray yarn, that's a more accurate color, actually, holding it back here versus all the way up here where it gets blown out. This gray yarn is Periwinkle Sheep watercolor sock yarn, and the colorway is Thunderstorm, and it's a really lovely tonal dark gray. And this speckly yarn is Plymouth Happy Feet 100 Splash, and the colorway is Autumn, or 104. So it's a lovely cream with all these different speckles in it. So I think this will probably fit the baby for its first Christmas. I think it'll be about a 9-month size. So I just really have to pick up the sleeves and knit the sleeves, and I'll be all done. You know, minus blocking, and there are buttons, I should say, in here. There are 3 buttonholes. There's 1, 2, and 3. So I have some buttons picked out for this. So yeah, this is a paid-for pattern. I'm using size 3 needles throughout. The pattern calls for using size 3 for the body, and then switching to size 4 for the color work. But I just tried to tension the color work, and I think it worked out okay. That is my only baby work in progress right now. I will say I have decided to wrap up loose ends on my mitered square blanket, on my sock yarn blanket, and turn that into a baby blanket for my niece or nephew. It's not quite square yet. I'm knitting it in this direction, and I don't think you can see the whole thing. Well, maybe you're getting most of it, but it's really horizontal still, and I think if I add 4 or 5 more rows, I will be able to essentially square it off and give it to them. They could use it to put over the car seat, you know, when the baby's in the car, just throw it on the ground, whatever they want to do with it. And then I have so many sock scraps, I'm going to start another blanket for myself. And I think my next blanket will be bigger in terms of the size of the squares. Or maybe I'll do a pinwheel blanket by Mina Phillip. I haven't decided, but I have not worked on this in a little while, so I have no blocks to show for you, to show you today. And all of the details about how I knit my blanket are available on my Ravelry page, which I will link to in the show notes. And that brings me to all of my other regular works in progress. I do have some progress on my dad's Christmas socks. Last week I showed you the first sock, which was done. I did not have a sock blocker for it that week, but I remembered to bring the sock blocker this week. This is Online Super Sock Forest in, I don't know the colorway name, but I will put it in the show notes. The heels, toes, and cuffs are opal sock yarn in just kind of a standard issue gray. Last week I had cast on the toe, and I was right here, and so I've knit probably 4 or 5 inches on the foot. I'm pretty pleased with this progress because it's probably been the main thing I've knit on, along with my fall shawl. Once I get beyond the heel turn, I feel as if I'm in the home stretch, even if the leg is ridiculously long, as is the case with this. I don't know why I still have my stitch marker here. Just left it there, I suppose. I'm knitting these on a size 1 needle. I cast on 36 stitches to give my dad an extra wide toe, and then I increased, I believe, every other round until I hit 72 stitches, and then I switched to the body yarn for the sock. So I'm really enjoying how these are knitting up, and it's nice to have a sock on the go. My dad has size 13 feet, and his feet are big in general, just big around, so the heels, toes, and cuffs yarn really help. I hope you don't hear a car alarm going off in the background. And I'm carrying this sock around in a dumpling bag from Knitting Addiction in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, if you are unfamiliar. Okay, I have another sock to show you, and it's another half-finished object. So let me put it on a blocker. Oh good, the car alarm stopped. So last week I was at this stitch marker when I showed you the sock, and so I have since finished it. This is Western Sky Knits Magnolia Sock, which is a merino cashmere nylon. I believe it's about 385 yards in a skein, and it is the colorway Nightfall. So it's kind of a cream base with navy and teal and olivey green brown specks throughout. I love the colorway. Unfortunately, this yarn does bleed as I'm knitting with it, perhaps the most of any yarn I've ever used, and that's a real bummer because, you know, who wants yarn dye all over their hands while they're knitting? So that's kind of why I decided to just cut my losses and make these kind of exaggerated anklet socks, basically. I am knitting these on over 66 stitches. I cast on 32 with Judy's Magic Cast On, increased probably every third round and until I hit 66. And then I went up the foot, did a fish lips kiss heel, and I knit probably about 20 or 30 rounds stockinette before I switched to 2x2 ribbing. And I have cast on the mate, which is just a little sock goatee right now. And while I'm thinking of it, I'm going to move the stitch marker, my little progress keeper, to the sock in progress. It is nice keeping those on projects so that you can kind of motivate yourself to go a little further and have more to show for your work. And this sock is being carried around in this llama bag, which is from Mongrel, which is a little gift shop in Richmond. It's pretty heavy duty canvas. I could see it being a pencil bag, like, you know, or a school supply bag, that kind of thing. What's next for work in progress? Well, just one left, and it's my fall shawl. I'm carrying this in a Nico Zuki Knits bag, and I received a question on my blog about this, about the bag maker. And I will certainly link to it in the show notes this time. I haven't linked to bag makers before, but I will definitely do that from now on. This is the Line Break Shawl by Vera Valimaki. Let's see. And it is getting quite sizable on my needles, actually, I have to say. Last week I was right here at this green stitch marker, so I've made a bit of progress. It looks like a lot on this side because this side is a pretty big section, and then there's this big middle section, and then there is this little itty bitty side. The rows are uneven because it is a short row construction, and I won't explain too much more than that, except that it's basically a garter stitch shawl with eyelet rows every so often. And you can see you've got these two sections of eyelets here that keep going down the shawl. So I really love this. I'm knitting this on a size 6 needle, which is a 4.5 millimeter. I'm alternating skeins of Hedgehog Fibers sock in the colorway Ghost. This one is a lot more white than this one, so I'm alternating skeins, and I think that's working out well. Line Break is a paid-for pattern, and it calls for 2 skeins of sock yarn. That brings me to future knits. I do have plans for a new cast-on in the next week or two. If you were watching the Knit Shift a year ago, you will remember that I went to SAF, which is the Southeastern Animal Fiber Fair in, I think it's in, I can't think of the town now, but it's in North Carolina near Asheville, so the western side of North Carolina. And I went with 3 of my friends, and we all made matching hats, and we decided to do that again this year. So we've settled on a pattern, and let me show it to you. I don't really know how this is pronounced. I think it's Drikey. It's a pattern designed by Shannon Cook, and it is a slouchy beanie with patterned triangles on it. So as a matter of background, last year my friends and I all purchased the same Miss Babs yarn in different weights at her booth at SAF. And it was an exclusive colorway to SAF. Oops, I showed you the wrong side. This is the right side. So I knitted Antarctis out of mine, which is a pattern by Janina Callio, and I decided to knit my hat to match my Antarctis. So here's my shawl, and this is the yarn I'm going to knit the Drikey hat out of. It's a sock weight yarn that I'm going to hold double, and I think it really picks up the nice rusty colors in this shawl, which will be great for fall. This is Periwinkle Sheep watercolor sock yarn in the colorway 11 Ways to Dry a Chili Pepper. I just think that's a fun colorway name. And it's a lovely tonal rusty orange. It's a 75/25 superwash merino nylon, 460 yards, fingering weight. I believe it calls for a worsted weight yarn. Yes, it does. $4.95 for the pattern. So I hope to get that started this week. Well, it's not the last segment, but the very next segment is Yarms. I have one thing to share with you this week, and if I can find it in my pile of stuff, I got my last installment of the Hedgehog Fibers Twist Sock Club, and I'm very excited about it, and it's called Magic Potion. It's navy with blips of sea green and some mottled speckles, and there's even some pinky speckles in there too. So I'm really excited about this. I could easily see this becoming a shawl or a cowl or possibly a baby knit. I thought I would talk about my Hedgehog Fibers sock, the whole club experience as a whole today, because this is my final installment. Hedgehog Fibers sock does multiple clubs for various bases of yarn. You could do the sock yarn club, which is a much softer, looser twist yarn. It's a merino nylon yarn, and you get 2 skeins, 2 different colorways, 1 skein of each colorway each month for 3 months, so you end up with 6 skeins of yarn. The Twist Sock Club, you get 1 skein of yarn a month for 3 months, so you end up with 3 skeins total. They do a lace weight, maybe multiple lace weight clubs. They do mini clubs, and Hedgehog Fibers is based in Ireland, and I have to say, even with that distance, it's a pretty reasonable purchase for someone in the US like myself. I am really pleased with my experience overall. The shipping was insanely fast. I feel like it got here 3 or 4 days after I got the shipping notice from Ireland, which is fantastic. And yeah, overall, I'm really pleased with it. And just to review, this was the first skein I got, and this is the colorway Minx. This is probably my favorite of all of them. I just think this is so pretty. The next one I got was Candy Floss. Now that I said that the other one was my favorite, this might actually be my favorite. I just think it's so pretty. I think this will end up becoming socks for myself. This, I think, will end up in a shawl with like a purple. I think I showed that color combination with you before. And then, of course, there's Magic Potion. So all 3 of these are really fantastic. I did not sign up for another run in the club because A, I knew I was going to Texas where I would be buying yarn. And if you watched last week's episode, I showed you all of the yarn I bought in Texas. And B, I knew I was going to SAF pretty soon, and so I didn't want to have the expense of another club membership for 3 more months. So I'm quite pleased with these, and they will be great they'll be great living in my stash for the foreseeable future. And I have one more little thing to show you in Yarms, though it is not any Yarms. Someone who watches this podcast, her name is Marcia. She messaged me and asked if she could mail me something. And I said, sure, I would love that. Thank you so much. And then it arrived, and it just seriously made my day, Marcia. It was a really long day at work, and I usually have packages mailed to my office, and a coworker brought it over and said, you got this, and kind of tossed it on my desk, and I was like, oh, yay, mail. So this made my day. Marcia, and I won't mention your Ravelry name, mostly because I forgot it, but Marcia told me I could share her name. She made me a project bag. And it is a really big project bag. It stands up on its own. It's got a nice base to it. And you can see that the fabric is stockinette stitch. Maybe it's 1x1 rib. It's kind of stretchy looking. And then the top is sheep knitting. And it's quilted. I hope you can see the vertical lines here of quilting. So it's really nice and reinforced. And it's got this, oh, and there's a pocket inside. I didn't even see the pocket. Oh my gosh. It's lined with this great gray fabric, and there's a red pocket inside. I hadn't opened it up yet, Marcia. So it's really deep. I feel like this could hold the beginnings of a sweater. It's got a great zipper and this awesome little handle. And Marcia does not have an Etsy shop that I know of, but she just made me a bag, and I am so honored and tickled, Marcia. Thank you so much. This really did make my week, because it was a very busy week at work, and it just thrilled me to no end, and I cannot wait to put a project in this bag. So thank you so much, Marcia. It was so kind of you. I really appreciate it. Oh, I was going to tell you a little bit about my week with the storm. And I have one pattern to share with you that I really liked that came out recently. Hermine, the tropical storm, passed through late Friday into Saturday. It caused flooding in all of the usual spots that flood in our area. And I basically started work at 7:30 at home in my pajamas, updating the website, and then I ended up going into work around noon and working until about 10:30 at night. So it was a pretty long day, very long day actually. And yeah, it was exciting and crazy and really a big adrenaline rush. And then I came home and I slept like a baby last night. So that's that. So that brings me to sharing a pattern of the week with you. It came out in August, And it's by the designer Kirsten Kapoor, who has designed tons of things, including lots of beautiful shawls, like the Almas shawl. I can't even think of any others right now, but she has a ton of shawls. This is a 2-color shawl by her. It's a $6 pattern, and it kind of took my breath away when I saw it. Oopsie, I just shut the screen off. It's a 2-color shawl. You start in one corner, and it looks like there are some eyelets, and then you stripe the yarn, and then you finish with the gray. And I just think that is so, so pretty. So this would be a wonderful shawl to knit for the fall shawl knit along. So I just wanted to share that with you because I'm desperate to make one of these. It calls for Miss Babs Kira, which is a fingering weight yarn, and I will say it says that it calls for Kira, which is a sock yarn with approximately 560 yards in each skein. So this is a very generous. You need more than one. Like most sock yarns are approximately 350 to 450 yards, and this calls for a very generous skein of fingering weight yarn for each colorway. So you might need 2 and 2 in terms of 2 skeins of color A and 2 skeins of color B if you're using just a random sock yarn. So just be warned about that. There it is on the model. Look at how generous a wrap that is. I think that's everything for me this week. Oh, no, I lied. I have one more thing to tell you about. My friend Casey, who is one of my SAF buddies, has started, she's not ready to call it a podcast. Maybe she won't ever, and that's fine. She started doing a video update in accompaniment with her blog, which is found at knitsenough.com. And she's a spinner, she's a knitter, she's just a lovely all-around person, and I think you guys would really like it. And she is on YouTube, so if you search Knits Enough, you will find her, and I will link to her in the show notes. But she has 1 episode up so far. She said she's going to try and record every 2 weeks, so I'm kind of crossing my fingers that there is another one this weekend. But no pressure, Casey, I swear. Just, I really am excited for you, so you guys should definitely check her out. So until next week, you guys, take care. Thank you for hopefully sharing in my excitement over my niece or nephew. I am so thrilled about this. I'm very excited to be an aunt, in case it's not clear. And I will talk to you next week, hopefully. And until then, happy knitting, happy crocheting. See you guys soon. Bye.